You let my commander sit outside in the rain for 2 hours, and not one of you helped. The shout cut through the VA Medical Center lobby, just as the director walked in from his meeting and saw him, an old man, sitting still in the rain, soaked to the skin. No one asked. No one helped. No one knew. He was the very man who once saved that director's life. But what shocking truth would unfold next? The most powerful part, he never said a word, never told them who he was. He just sat and waited, a quiet hero forgotten in the very place he once served. But when the truth came out, the entire center had to stand up, not because of rank, but because they had just lost something sacred: gratitude. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Malik's first day started under a heavy gray sky, the kind of morning that felt like the whole world was holding its breath. No rain yet, just the weight of something coming. He arrived early at the Crestwood VA Medical Center, still adjusting to his uniform, still new to civilian life, security badge pinned, boots polished, back straight. 6 months ago, Malik was walking patrol in Kabul. Now he stood guard at a place where silence came not from danger, but from forgetting. He wasn't nervous, but something in his gut told him this wasn't just another day. The lobby filled quickly. Veterans trickled in one after another, some with walkers, some alone, some with worn caps from wars people barely remembered. Conversations were quiet. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cheap coffee. News played on the TV above the check-in desk, muted. He noticed how the building seemed to breathe tired, mechanical, like it had seen too many broken bodies and too many lost records. Malik scanned the room, just watching, learning. And then the door slid open again. The man who stepped in didn't rush, older, upright, but with years on his shoulders, wore a plain olive coat. No flashy medals, no gear, just a folded appointment slip in one hand and a calmness in the way he moved that caught Malik's eye. He walked to the front desk and waited quietly. Malik couldn't hear their exchange, but he saw the receptionist frown. She looked back at her monitor, then up at the man. He handed her the paper. A short conversation followed. She shook her head. He nodded, and then turned around. The man walked past Malik without looking up, out the door again. Malik caught part of the receptionist muttering, "Rescheduled, we're full, told him to wait outside if he wants." Outside. Malik stepped closer to the window. The older man had found a bench under the awning, just near the far end of the entryway. It wasn't much shelter. The wind had started to pick up. Rain touched the edges of the concrete, now drifting sideways. Still, the man just sat. He didn't look upset, didn't complain. He just folded his hands over his lap and looked straight ahead. More patients came in. A woman with a cane asked for a bathroom. Someone dropped a clipboard. Phones rang, the usual chaos of an overwhelmed system. But outside, the man didn't move. Malik kept an eye on him. Rain had started to fall steadily now, nothing dramatic, just persistent, the kind that soaks through slowly without making a sound. The edge of the awning dripped down onto the man's shoulder. He didn't flinch. Most people would have asked to come back in. Most people would have insisted. He didn't. Malik found himself getting irritated, not at the man, but at the situation. He saw a nurse walk past him on her way inside. She glanced at the bench, paused briefly, then continued. A security guard came out for a smoke, took one look at the man, and said, "Tough day, huh, Pop?" The old man just nodded. Then silence again. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. Malik walked over to Rick, the senior security officer. "Guy outside," Malik said quietly. "He's been sitting there for a while." Rick didn't look up from his tablet. "No appointment in the system. We can't let folks loiter." He had a slip, probably printed wrong, happens. Malik clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He'd only been here a week. This wasn't his call. But something told him this wasn't a man who just wandered in off the street. The man didn't shift once, didn't pull his coat tighter, didn't check a watch, just sat upright, steady, like he'd been trained to wait without asking. And that's what struck Malik the most: the stillness, the dignity, the silence. At some point, the receptionist called a name. No response. She repeated it, looked around, shrugged, called someone else instead. The man on the bench was never mentioned. Malik stepped closer to the window again. Rainwater was pooling around the bench legs now. The man's shoulders were soaked, his hair matted to his head, but he didn't move. He didn't wipe his face. He didn't cross his arms. He just waited. Malik finally stepped out with a lost-and-found umbrella. He approached slowly. "Sir," he said. The man turned his head, expression calm, eyes direct, not surprised. "I don't think you should be out here," Malik said. "Let me check if we can make room." "No need," the man said softly. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not, I'm just saying, I've waited in worse places." The voice wasn't bitter. It wasn't proud either. It was just factual, like a man who'd said that line many times before. Malik felt a lump form in his throat. "You sure?" The man smiled gently. "Yes, son. But thank you." Malik hesitated, then nodded, walked back inside. He didn't return to his post right away. He hovered near the admin desk, watched the staff shuffle papers, check insurance numbers, argue about printer ink. And outside, that man kept sitting. Melissa, an admin assistant, looked up from her files. "He's still out there?" she asked. "Yeah." She leaned by the window beside Malik. "You ever meet someone and just feel like you're supposed to know who they are?" Malik didn't answer. He was thinking the same thing. The man didn't speak his name again, didn't tell his story, didn't demand to be seen. He simply waited and waited and waited, as if waiting wasn't painful, as if waiting was part of the job. But who was this mysterious man, really? The rain didn't let up. By midday, it had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind that didn't make headlines, but made people uncomfortable. A soft curtain of water swept across the VA Medical Center's front steps, soaking everything but the highest corners of the concrete awning. And still, Gerald Reeve didn't move at all. He remained on the bench, same posture, same patience, like he'd blended into the landscape, like a statue. No one had the heart to disturb. Malik stood by the lobby window, watching again. At first, he'd felt irritation, then concern. Now it was something deeper: respect, maybe, or confusion. "How long's he been out there now?" Melissa asked, appearing beside him. Malik checked his watch. "Over 90 minutes, he said. Hasn't left that spot." Melissa frowned. "Did he ever raise his voice, ask to come in?" "Nope." "Did he look angry?" "Not once." Melissa looked out the window. Rain streaked the glass between them and the man in the coat. "You know what's strange," she murmured. "It's not just that he's still there. It's that he seems fine with it." Inside, the building was tense as usual. Appointments ran behind, staff were short-handed. An older Marine at the pharmacy was cursing out the automated refill system. Somewhere down the hallway, someone knocked over a tray of surgical gloves. But Malik wasn't thinking about any of that. His eyes kept drifting back to the man on the bench. There was something about how still he sat, something deliberate, not passive, not defeated, intentional, like he was used to being invisible, but never allowed himself to vanish. A few staff walked by, following Malik's gaze. One chuckled, "He's still out there. Maybe he likes the rain." "Maybe he forgot where he is," another said. "Some of them do." Malik stayed silent. He knew that kind of talk, knew how fast people labeled what they didn't understand. Just before 1 o'clock, a janitor came out to mop near the entryway. The rain splashed at his feet. He glanced toward the bench and paused. "Hey," he said to Malik, that old guy, he'd been out there this whole time. Malik nodded. "Did he ask for help?" "No." "Damn." The janitor didn't say more, but he stopped mopping for a moment, just stood there watching, then went back inside. That's how it started, not with a speech, not with an announcement, just glances, glimpses, questions whispered in corners, like people were beginning to feel what Malik had felt, that there was something they were missing, something important, and that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong to ignore it. A young woman entered the building. She walked briskly, hoodie up, phone in hand. As she reached the door, she nearly brushed past Reeve, but slowed, looked at him, looked again. He offered a small nod. She looked away quickly, embarrassed, but held the door open behind her a few seconds longer than necessary. Malik caught the moment. So did Melissa. He's not doing anything, she said, not even trying to get their attention. Malik nodded. That's what's making people notice. Rick, the senior guard, came back from his lunch break. Still watching Rainman, he smirked. Malik didn't reply. Rick sipped his coffee and leaned against the wall. He's harmless, quiet type. We get them all the time. They think if they wait long enough, someone will notice. Malik's jaw tightened. Sometimes, he said, maybe someone should. The lobby fell into another lull. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. A nurse rolled by with a tray of blood pressure monitors. Phones beeped. A man coughed harshly in the corner. But that bench outside never changed. And the man on it, still waiting, still upright, still soaked. At 1:40, something shifted. Melissa, still at her desk, began scrolling through the database. She typed in Gerald Reeve, nothing current. She tried again, older archives, legacy system. A few entries popped up, minimal details, a few checkups, one physical, a note about medication from years ago, but the file was odd, incomplete, almost intentionally blank. She narrowed her eyes. Hey, Malik, she said. He came over. This guy's file is like a ghost. He's been here before, but it's like no one ever really looked. Malik leaned in. Can you pull more? I'll try. A minute later, she found a small note, something buried deep in an older scheduling system. Patient declined transport assistance, chose to walk in, former service details classified. Malik read it twice. Classified. Melissa nodded slowly. That's rare. We don't get that kind of tag anymore. Malik stared at the screen, then turned toward the door. Outside, the rain had slowed, but it was too late. Reeve's coat was soaked through, his shoes dark with water, his shoulders hunched slightly now, but not from weakness, more like he was bracing against a different kind of weight. Malik stepped back into the lobby. He looked around and realized something strange. Half the room was watching him now, or rather watching the man outside. A nurse whispered to another, he's still there. The reply, almost 2 hours now. Someone near the pharmacy counter turned and said, what's he waiting for? Nobody knew. Nobody had asked. And somehow, everyone felt guilty for it. The silence was louder than before, not empty, not quiet, full of something building, something Malik couldn't name yet. But whatever it was, he knew it was about to break. How would this silence finally shatter? There are different kinds of silence, the kind that fills a waiting room when someone gets bad news, the kind that hangs in the air after a hard goodbye, and the kind that makes people shift in their seats because it feels like they should have said something, but didn't. That was the kind of silence in the VA center now. It didn't start all at once. It crept in, like rain soaking into the walls. Malik felt it first. He wasn't sure when it changed, only that it had. People weren't making jokes about Rainman anymore. They weren't rolling their eyes. They were watching quietly, carefully. Every so often, someone would glance toward the bench outside and then quickly look away, as if they'd seen something they didn't want to explain. Inside, Melissa sat at her desk with her brows furrowed. She'd been combing the archive systems for 15 minutes now. Most patient files in the VA database were annoyingly thorough, pages of charts, medications, scan notes. But the file for Gerald Reeve, barely a paragraph, just a name, a few appointment dates, no birth year, no discharge papers, no unit history, no rank, nothing. She tapped her pen against her chin. There's something off, she murmured. Malik turned toward her. What do you mean? It's like someone scrubbed his record clean, she said, or never filled it out at all. That didn't sit right. Malik had read thousands of military profiles. Even the most routine ones had lines like served in logistics or discharged with honors. But this one, it felt hollow, empty by design. He leaned closer. "There's got to be more," he said. Melissa nodded. "I'll keep digging." Out in the rain, Reeve shifted slightly on the bench, his first real movement in hours, not to stretch, not to stand, just to pull something out of his coat pocket, a small cloth, faded tan, folded into a square. He opened it slowly, carefully, like it mattered. Inside was nothing but a weathered metal pin. Malik couldn't see it clearly through the glass, but he saw how the man looked at it, like it was a memory made solid. Then he tucked it back inside, quietly, like a ritual. At the far end of the lobby, two younger veterans were watching now, too. One leaned to the other and whispered, "That guy out there, you think he's homeless?" His friend shook his head. "Doesn't look like it." "How come?" "Look at the way he sits." Malik had noticed it, too. There was something in Reeve's posture that didn't match his years, not just discipline, not just strength, purpose, like he knew who he was, even if no one else did. Melissa cleared her throat. "Malik, I think I found something." He stepped over quickly. "I tried to cross-reference with old federal VA databases outside our local branch," she explained. "There's no service history under this name, but I found this," she said, pointing to a scanned intake form from nearly a decade ago. Most of it redacted, but in the corner, handwritten in small print, were two words: status restricted, classified. Malik stared. "That's not a normal flag," she added. "Even special forces guys don't get that." Malik nodded slowly. Something deeper was at play. At that moment, a shift in the building caught his attention. People were standing, not a lot, but enough to notice. Veterans in the waiting room were getting up and walking closer to the windows, not crowding, just looking, like they suddenly remembered what it felt like to wait in the rain. One man whispered to no one in particular, they shouldn't have left him out there. A woman, mid-40s, wearing a nurse's badge, came over to Malik. She spoke softly. "I was here when my dad passed 5 years ago. He used to say, you could always spot a leader by how quiet they were." She looked out toward Reeve. "That man hasn't said a word, but I think he's the most commanding presence I've seen all year." It was true, the longer he waited, the louder his silence became. Malik stepped outside again, this time with no umbrella. The rain had lightened, but the air was cold, sharp, the kind that snuck into your sleeves and behind your collar. Reeve didn't turn his head, but he knew Malik was there. "Still no room?" he asked, not unkindly. Malik sat on the edge of the bench beside him. "No, sir," he replied, "but that's not why I'm out here." A pause. "I think I owe you an apology," Malik said. Reeve looked at him finally, eyes sharp, awake. "For what?" "For watching you sit here all morning and not doing anything about it." Reeve smiled faintly. "You're doing something now." "I should have done it earlier." "Maybe," Reeve said, "or maybe now is exactly the right time." They sat like that for a while, no words, no explanations, just two soldiers from different wars, watching the rain and the people who forgot what it meant to wait. When Malik stood to return inside, Reeve nodded once in thanks, not for the apology, but for the silence they shared. Back inside, Melissa was waiting with a printout. "It's not much," she said, handing it over, "but it's something." Malik scanned the page. It was barely a paragraph, but it was enough. Reeve had once been flagged for non-standard field leadership, no formal title, no official honors, but mentioned in 3 separate commendations by officers who were later promoted to colonel or higher. And then, nothing, no retirement notice, no medal ceremony, just a gap. "Who is this guy?" Malik whispered. Melissa didn't answer, but someone else nearby did. Rick had wandered over, a coffee cup in hand. He took one look at the file, squinted, then muttered almost to himself, "I'll be damned." "What?" Malik asked. Rick shook his head slowly. "I think I saw that name once, years ago, Fort Bragg, the guy they called the Anchor." "Anchor?" "Yeah," Rick said, because in every report, when things went sideways, they'd write, and then Reeve held the line. Malik looked toward the window again. The man was still sitting, still silent, still holding the line even now. The man still hadn't moved. By now, it had been more than 2 hours, maybe closer to 3, no umbrella, no complaint, not even a shifting of weight. Inside, the mood had changed completely. You could feel it in the way people spoke more quietly, in how nurses paused near the glass a second longer than needed, in how no one made jokes anymore. And Malik, he couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why? Why would a man sit through cold rain, wet to the bone, and say nothing? Why wouldn't he demand to be seen? Melissa had done everything she could, every file, every code, every locked record. All led to one conclusion: whoever Gerald Reeve was, someone had once gone to great lengths to keep his name quiet, not to erase it, to protect it. Then, without warning, the automatic door slid open, and a gust of wet air pushed into the lobby. A man stepped inside, a tall, clean-cut, wearing a water-darkened suit under an unbuttoned overcoat. His walk was fast, purposeful. A few staff nodded politely, but he didn't return the gestures. He didn't have to. Everyone recognized Dr. Marcus Harland, the director of the facility. He'd been out all morning at a regional health summit. Now he was back. But as he passed the front desk, he froze. His eyes caught the bench just outside the glass. And for a moment, just a moment, he stood completely still. No one noticed at first. Then he dropped his leather folder and walked straight toward the door. Malik, standing near the entrance, stepped aside instinctively. Harland brushed past him without a word. His movements were sharp, focused. He stepped out into the drizzle, his shoes splashing into the shallow water pool by the curb, and then he stopped right in front of the bench. The man on the bench didn't look up right away, but when he did, his eyes met Harland's. For a moment, time folded. Malik didn't hear what was said first, but what he saw would never leave him. Dr. Marcus Harland removed his glasses, then his coat, and with military precision, he stood at attention, straightened his back, raised his right hand, and saluted, a crisp, clean, regulation salute to the soaked, silent man on the bench. Inside the lobby, everyone froze. A nurse gasped. A clipboard dropped. Melissa covered her mouth with one hand. Outside, Gerald Reeve returned the salute slowly, calmly, and only then did Harland speak. "Commander Reeve," he said, voice low but clear, "I didn't know you were still alive." Reeve smiled faintly. "Most days, neither do I." Malik stepped closer to the doorway. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, the director of the entire VA center calling this man commander, and not just saying it like it meant everything. Harland's voice carried inside. "Sir, may I ask why didn't you come in?" Reeve looked away briefly. "Didn't want to cause trouble. Wasn't on the list." The answer hit harder than any shout ever could. Harland clenched his jaw. His hands formed fists, then relaxed. He turned toward the entrance. "Open the door," he said to Malik. "Now." Malik moved fast, holding it wide. Harland stepped back and extended his arm to Reeve. "Let me help you in, sir." Reeve stood slowly, his knees stiff, shoulders soaked, but his back still straight. He took the offered arm without hesitation, not because he needed help, but because he knew what it meant to let someone offer it. As they walked in, everything stopped. Phones stopped ringing. Keyboards stopped clacking. People stood. Every head turned, because every person in that room now understood this wasn't just a veteran, this wasn't just another appointment, this was someone they should have never forgotten. Harland led him past the front desk, past the chairs, past the silence, into the hallway that led to private offices. But before they disappeared, Harland turned around, looked directly at the receptionist who had sent Reeve away. His voice was even, controlled. "That man sat outside for nearly 3 hours in full rain and silence because we failed to recognize who was in front of us. I served under him in Kandahar. He continued, he pulled me out of a bunker with a shattered leg while mortars dropped on our heads." His eyes swept across the room. "I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him." The receptionist's face turned pale. She looked down at her keyboard, speechless. Malik saw it all, the shame, the realization, but also something else, the beginning of respect. As Reeve disappeared down the hall, Melissa whispered, "I knew it. I knew he was someone." Malik didn't reply. He just stood there, feeling the gravity settle in. Later, back at the guard station, Rick finally broke the silence. He muttered, "A salute like that? You don't fake it," then added quietly, "Only a few men alive could stand like that after everything, and fewer still would choose to wait outside rather than ask for what they earned." Malik nodded, and for the first time that day, he understood what kind of man Gerald Reeve really was. They didn't need an announcement. The moment Commander Reeve was helped inside, word spread through the building like a wave no one could stop. Veterans in wheelchairs sat up straighter. Staff paused mid-task. Doctors stepped out of rooms. Nurses fell silent mid-sentence, not because someone told them to, but because something real had walked back into their world and demanded respect, quietly. Dr. Marcus Harland led Reeve into a private office, helped him out of his soaked coat, pulled up a chair, and then, for a long moment, just sat across from him in silence. He didn't ask about medals. He didn't bring up battles. He just said, "You were the reason I didn't die in 2004. I've been carrying that memory my whole career, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to see you again." Reeve offered a faint smile. "Shame doesn't suit you, Doctor." "Neither does forgetting," Harland replied. Meanwhile, in the main lobby, Melissa was typing furiously. Malik stood beside her, watching every word appear on the screen. They were no longer just searching, they were preparing to tell the staff what they should have known all along. "Pull up everything," Malik said, "every reference, every name drop, every unofficial commendation." Melissa opened the restricted archives, cross-referenced defense memos, unsealed a legacy folder that hadn't been accessed in 15 years. What they found left the room breathless. Reeve had served in 4 major combat zones. He had never accepted promotion past field commander, always stayed on the ground. Every report, every last one, there was a pattern. Commander Reeve remained behind to extract wounded, held the line during air evacuation, refused evacuation until all under his command were clear, credited with saving entire squad during ambush. No medals were listed, but in the margins of one declassified document, a colonel's handwritten note said, "If not for classification restrictions, this man would wear 5 stars." Malik stared at the screen, then slowly turned to the staff around him. How many of us just watched him sit outside and assumed he was nobody? No one spoke, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Dr. Harland stepped back into the room. His presence was electric now, not because of title, but because of truth. He looked at Malik. "Project the file on the monitor, full screen." Malik nodded. With one tap, Reeve's name filled the lobby display: photo, citations, redacted reports. And one final sentence at the bottom: Commander Reeve's status, operational legacy honor, unlisted by request. The room fell into total silence, until a voice from one of the veterans in the back spoke up. "He trained me, Fort Benning, 92. Another said, he pulled me out of a wreck in Baghdad. And then a third voice, elderly, quiet but unshaking, he held my brother while he died, never left his side." People began to stand, not as an order, but as an instinct. Harland faced the staff. "We talk a lot about honoring service, but we forget sometimes the greatest acts don't make it into a file. Sometimes the best among us never ask for recognition, but today, we recognize him." He stepped to the wall and pulled down the plaque labeled Director's Excellence Award. In its place, he placed a temporary marker, handwritten by Melissa, reserved in honor of Commander Gerald Reeve, who waited in the rain so we could wake up. Later, Malik found himself walking down the hallway, past recovery rooms, past posters that suddenly felt too shallow. He reached the waiting area where Reeve was now sitting, inside, dry, warm, quiet. Malik sat next to him again. "I saw the file," he said softly. Reeve gave him a small nod. "I should have said something sooner," Malik continued. Reeve looked at him, not with judgment, just stillness, then said, "You did what you were trained to do. You observed. You waited. And when the moment came, you acted." Malik swallowed hard. "You could have told them who you were." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Reeve looked down at his hands. "Because I needed to know who they were. How they treat the nameless tells me everything." That hit Malik deeper than anything all day, because that wasn't just wisdom, that was leadership, the kind that didn't demand loyalty, it revealed it. By the end of the afternoon, a new policy had been drafted: no veteran would ever be asked to wait outside again, regardless of scheduling, weather, or system error. A new bench was ordered for the front, custom built, with a brass plate already engraved, for the quiet ones who never asked, but always deserved. That evening, as the building emptied out and the rain faded to mist, Malik passed the entrance one last time and saw a folded cloth resting on the bench outside, and inside it, a small weathered pin, and beside it, a note in neat handwriting: "You found me, now find others, Gr." The next morning, the rain was gone. The air was fresh, sharp with early sunlight, the kind of morning where everything feels lighter because something heavy had already been lifted the day before. But something lingered, too, a story, a truth, one that had sat for hours in the rain and finally stood up. By 7 a.m., the new brass plaque had already been mounted on the front bench. It wasn't large, it wasn't showy, just simple lettering set against dark steel, reserved for the quiet ones who never needed to speak for the world to listen. Next to it, inside the center, a new policy memo had been posted, effective immediately: no veteran shall be asked to wait outside this facility. If we are full inside, we make room. If we are busy, we pause. If we forget, let this bench remind us. Signed at the bottom, Dr. Marcus Harland, Facility Director, and in smaller type below, Commander Gerald Reeve, U.S. Army, Ret. No ceremony had been scheduled, no ribbon was cut. But still, they came. By 8 a.m., half the staff stood near the windows, not talking, just watching. Reeve had returned, this time dry, rested, standing tall in a clean jacket that looked somehow familiar, military issue, but softened by years of use. He didn't enter right away. He stood in front of the bench, looked at the plaque, ran his hand over the metal with a kind of reverence, then sat down again, just for a moment. Malik stepped outside. He didn't salute, didn't speak right away. He simply sat beside the older man, 2 uniforms, 2 generations, the same silence between them, but this time, it wasn't uncertain, it was shared. "I thought you'd left," Malik finally said. "I was never really here," Reeve replied with a faint grin. Malik chuckled. "That's not true." Reeve nodded. "Maybe not anymore." Inside, a few veterans clapped lightly against the glass, not loudly, not to interrupt, just enough for the moment to hold. Later that morning, a group of high school ROTC students arrived for a volunteer tour. Their instructor, an older woman with sharp posture, noticed the new plaque. She asked one of the nurses what it meant. The nurse didn't reply, she just pointed toward Reeve, who had just stood up. The instructor froze, her eyes widened. She turned back to her students and said softly, "That man, I want you to remember him, not because of what he did, but because of how he waited." By midday, Reeve had finished his checkup. Dr. Harland personally escorted him to the exit. They shook hands without words, the kind of handshake you don't see anymore, one forged not from obligation, but earned memory. As Reeve turned to go, Harland stepped back and said, just loud enough to hear, "This building may have my name on the door, but its foundation was poured by men like you." Reeve smiled, didn't respond, because he didn't need to. That afternoon, Malik returned to the bench. He placed a small object beneath the plaque, the weathered cloth, inside the old pin. He didn't tell anyone he left it there, but over the weeks, others began doing the same: a worn dog tag, a patch, a coin. By the end of the month, the collection had grown into something unspoken, an altar without rules. A few weeks later, a new staff member arrived, young, eager, clumsy with the login system. Malik was showing him around when they passed the bench. The new guy raised an eyebrow. "What's that for?" Malik didn't rush to answer. He looked at the plaque, then at the folded cloth still resting beneath it, then said calmly, "That's for the people you overlook once, but never again." The new guy nodded. "Was it someone important?" Malik paused, thought for a long second, then smiled almost to himself. "Yeah, he still is." That weekend, a short article appeared in the local paper, headline, "The Man in the Rain, a Reminder at the VA." No byline, no fanfare, just a photo of the bench shining in the morning sun. And below it, a quote from Reeve when he'd said quietly during his visit, but someone had written down, "The rain falls on everyone the same. The difference is who notices who's getting wet." And that became the story, the one they told during onboarding, the one veterans whispered to each other in the hallway, the one staff quietly passed on without needing to explain, not about medals, not about rank, but about a man who waited and reminded them all who they were meant to serve. Malik never forgot the day it all happened, not because of what Reeve said, but because of what he didn't. And sometimes, that's the loudest kind of leadership there is. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.